In America, when a snake gets into your house, there is a protocol. You back away slowly. You call someone. You pay that someone a significant amount of money to come to your home, locate the snake, remove the snake, and seal whatever gap it came through so it never happens again. The pest control industry in the United States is worth $15 billion a year, and a big chunk of that money exists for exactly this reason. The idea of sharing your home with a wild animal is something Americans spend real money to prevent. Now, picture a Vietnamese family, grandparents, parents, 3 kids, living in a traditional tile-roofed home in the Red River Delta north of Hanoi. It's evening. Dinner is finished. The kids are doing homework. The grandfather is sitting on the porch. From the ceiling, from the space directly above the kitchen, between the top of the wall and the roof tiles, comes a slow, dry sound. Something large moving through a tight space. The grandfather looks up. He smiles. He tells his grandson, "Con ranya veroy." The house snake is home. No one calls anyone. No one backs away. The grandmother puts a small bowl of water near the base of the wall. The family goes to bed. This is not a story about a family that doesn't know there's a snake in their ceiling. They know. They've known for years. And in their understanding, in an understanding that runs through Vietnamese culture going back thousands of years, the day that snake leaves is the day something starts to go wrong. The animal living in that ceiling is called Ptyas mucosa, the Indo-Chinese rat snake, or Run Rao Trao in Vietnamese. And before you picture something you might find in a terrarium at a pet store, let me give you the dimensions. An adult can reach 6 feet in length. Some individuals push 7. The body is thick, not python thick, but substantial enough that when one crosses a road at night, drivers sometimes swerve. The coloring is a deep, iridescent brown that shifts toward copper in certain light, with faint cross-banding that makes the scales look almost like hammered metal. The head is long and slightly flattened. The eyes are large, alert, and deeply intelligent, looking in a way that is unusual for a snake. It is non-venomous. It is also extremely fast, faster when alarmed than most humans expect a 6-foot snake to be. It can climb vertical surfaces, squeeze through gaps you would not believe, and drop from ceiling rafters to the floor without apparent concern. When you see one move at full speed, your brain has trouble processing what it's looking at. In the wild, Ptyas mucosa is found across South and Southeast Asia, but nowhere has it adapted more thoroughly to human habitation than in Vietnam. The traditional Vietnamese home is, quite literally, architecturally perfect for a large rat snake. Tiled roofs with accessible eaves. Walls that don't always meet the ceiling cleanly, raised storage areas for rice and grain, and an abundant, year-round food supply that has been drawing rats to human settlements since the first settlements were built. The rat snake found all of this and stayed. It has been staying for so long that its presence is now woven into the Vietnamese concept of what a home actually is. Here is what it does up there. Ptyas mucosa is a chemosensory hunter, meaning it navigates primarily by detecting chemical traces in the air and on surfaces using its forked tongue and a specialized organ in the roof of its mouth called the Jacobson's organ. Every time the tongue flicks out, which happens constantly, dozens of times a minute, when the snake is active, it is sampling the molecular environment around it. It can detect the chemical signature of a rat that passed through an area hours ago. It can track that signature through the dark, through tight spaces, through the complete 3-dimensional maze of a Vietnamese ceiling structure, directly to the source. A single adult rat snake can consume between 1 and 200 rodents per year. That is not an estimate. That is a conservative figure from field research. And this is where the Vietnamese relationship with the house snake stops being cultural folklore and starts being something that looks, in retrospect, like extremely practical public health policy. Rats carry disease. In a region where stored grain is the economic foundation of a household, where flooding periodically drives rat populations into dense contact with human spaces, and where medical care has not always been accessible, the difference between a home with a rat snake in the ceiling and a home without one was not trivial. It was measurable. Families with house snakes had less grain loss, fewer rat-borne illnesses, and, according to research done on traditional Vietnamese agricultural practices, statistically better household food security. Vietnamese families did not necessarily have the language of epidemiology, but they had generations of observation. They saw what happened to households that drove out their house snakes versus those that let them stay, and they encoded that observation in the most durable format available. To pre-literate communities, they made it sacred. Kill your house snake, and your fortune turns. Let it stay, and the household is protected. Give it water, and it remains loyal. That's not superstition dressed up as ecology. That's ecology that survived because it was dressed up as something people would actually respect. The mythology goes deeper than any individual household. Vietnamese culture traces its own origins to a union between a bird and a serpent, O Ko, the mountain fairy, and Lac Long Quan, the dragon lord of the sea, whose lineage is explicitly serpentine. The Vietnamese people have called themselves Con Rong Chao Tien, children of the dragon, grandchildren of the immortal, for as long as their oral tradition has existed. Americans watching this need to understand what that means at the level of daily life. It means snakes are not, in the Vietnamese cosmological framework, animals that threaten the household. They are, in the deepest possible sense, family, ancestors made flesh, water spirits made visible. The snake on your wall is not an intruder. It is closer to a visiting elder. Snake temples exist throughout Vietnam. The most famous is in Cam Luang Commune in Thanh Hoa Province, where a population of large water snakes has been venerated for centuries by the local community, fed, protected, never harmed. Researchers who study the site describe something that looks, from the outside, exactly like what it is: a community that has maintained a working ecological relationship with a wild animal population for longer than most American cities have existed. When a house snake appears for the first time in a Vietnamese home, when a family discovers that a large rat snake has quietly moved into the ceiling space they didn't know was accessible, the reaction is not panic. It is something closer to what Americans might feel if they learned that a new, desirable neighbor had moved in next door. There is acknowledgement. There is welcome. The name Con Ran Nha, the house snake, is applied immediately, and with the weight of a designation, not a description. Now here is where it gets complicated. The Indo-Chinese rat snake is in decline across Vietnam. The same animal that Vietnamese households have protected and welcomed for centuries is now being collected from the wild at a rate that researchers describe as unsustainable. The primary driver is not habitat loss. It is demand for snake meat in restaurants, demand for snake bile in traditional medicine, and demand driven by a market that has expanded rapidly as rural areas have become more connected to urban supply chains. The ecological consequences of removing large rat snakes from agricultural landscapes are not theoretical. They are already visible in some parts of Vietnam. Rising rat populations in rice-growing areas, increased grain loss, increased rodent-borne disease incidence. The feedback loop that Vietnamese culture identified thousands of years ago, house snake present, rats controlled, household stable, is running in reverse. A study published by Vietnamese agricultural researchers in the early 2000s estimated that the economic value of a single adult rat snake to an agricultural household, in rodent predation, grain protection, and disease reduction, was equivalent to several $100s per year. That is more than the snake would sell for at any market. The economics were never in favor of hunting them. The hunting happened anyway, because short-term cash is a different kind of pressure than long-term household benefit. What Vietnamese culture understood intuitively, and encoded in myth and practice and sacred designation, turns out to be exactly correct. The house snake is worth more alive in your ceiling than it is dead in any transaction you could make for it. There is something worth sitting with here for an American viewer. The United States spends $15 billion a year managing unwanted animals in and around homes, pest control, exterminators, rodenticides, ultrasonic repellers, sealed foundations. All of it designed to maintain a clean separation between human space and wild space, to keep the outside out. A Vietnamese family with a rat snake in their ceiling spends nothing on any of that. They spend nothing on rodent control, nothing on grain protection, nothing on the infrastructure of exclusion that Americans treat as a basic domestic necessity. They simply let an animal do what the animal already wants to do, in the space the animal already knows how to use. The snake wants to hunt rats. The rats are in the ceiling. The ceiling is connected to the grain storage. The family wants the grain protected and the rats gone. This is not a complicated arrangement. It is, in fact, the least complicated arrangement possible. Americans built a $15 billion industry around a problem that a 6-foot snake was already solving for free. If you have made it this far, and you are still uncomfortable with the idea of a snake in the ceiling, that is understandable. The discomfort is real and it is biological. Humans have threat detection systems that respond to snakes automatically. Below conscious reasoning evolved over millions of years. But the next time you watch a nature documentary that talks about apex predators keeping ecosystems in balance, the next time you hear about the importance of keystone species, the next time someone describes the complexity and wisdom of traditional ecological knowledge passed down through generations before Western science arrived with its clipboards, remember the rat snake in the Vietnamese ceiling. That is all of those things. It is an apex predator maintaining balance in a human-modified ecosystem. It is a keystone species in the ecology of a household. And the knowledge that it belongs there, that it should be welcomed and protected, and named, that knowledge was developed and preserved, and passed down in exactly the way that scientists now say traditional ecological knowledge works. It just looks like a grandmother leaving a bowl of water by the wall. Vietnam's wildlife is not always in the forest. Sometimes it is above your head, moving quietly through the dark, doing a job that no one asked it to do, that it has been doing since before the house was built. Subscribe if you want to keep finding out what else is up there. And leave a comment. Does this change how you think about pest control? About the animals you've been taught to fear? I'll see you in the next one.